Hello, hello. Welcome into this space, which is our, of course, the virtual space we get to be in together. And I don't know, especially lately, there's something about my office when I go live in here, and I kind of feel like I'm inviting you into my office, which is both. No, there's a lot of beauty in here. I'm really happy with my desk that I have in my office. I'm inviting you into, but also this morning I brought a candle in, had a session with a woman, and it was really beautiful. This hasn't happened in a little while, but as I was getting ready for that session, all of these pieces just started speaking to me, and they were like, take me with you, here, bring me. And so another piece that got called in this morning was up on my altar. And I don't know where I got this teeny little mini mason jar that says love on it, but this rose came from the garden. So just share little bits and pieces of the room that I am welcoming you into. My daughter made me this bouquet. I can't really tip it or the water will fall out, but it's hard to see. There's yarrow in here and a nasturtium, and then I don't know what this succulent is called, but she made that bouquet for me yesterday, and she brought it in with a note that said, what did it say? A gift for you from you don't know who. So that's the room. I invite you to bring yourself into the room. Hi, exactly, just like that. Just like Lisa did. It was, come say hi so I can see also who's in the room. I'd love to know where in the world you are. And that way you can start to also bring us into your room as well. Whether you let us know that you're actually in your living room or your bedroom or your office or at work. But even just knowing, you're in California or somewhere on the East Coast, in Europe, somewhere else in the world, anywhere that you are, it's really lovely to know where you are. So I say again, welcome. Welcome into this space. And I absolutely invite you to welcome yourself in as well by saying hi, letting me know, especially that you're here and where in the world you are. Same as if you're watching the replay. So if you're live, that's always fun. But if you're watching the replay, then you can also drop a comment. Let me know you're here for the replay. And similarly, in that way, I get to see who passed through the room even when I wasn't there live. It's always really wonderful. Yay, so someone's here from England and from Bali. Wow, okay. So like already our web is so wide. Okay. So welcome. This other piece that really wanted to come in today was this hawk feather. So I kind of think in the room is my teacher, Tim, and the land that he caretakes up near Mount Shasta in Northern California, because this feather came to him the first time he ever visited that land. So we're weaving the web here. We've got Hannah from Sweden. Oh, how exciting. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. I'm gonna pull up my my very, very organized notes. And there were just a few pieces I really wanted to touch on here. So I want to say at the outset, well, first of all, I love, just anytime you join, I'd love to hear who's here, where you are, but I also, anything that either speaks to you as really resonates, it's great to hear that things make sense. And then also if you have questions or you're curious, like, oh, that makes sense, but how does that actually work in my actual life? Or, I'm going to talk about relationships in particular. So, you can go like, well, that sounds good in theory, but how might that work in this actual dynamic with, this person in my life or this area of my life or what have you? And so questions, some dialogue in terms of this or if you see things from a different perspective. I really always welcome that. I welcome that. And partly, I brought this distinction around tending both into the live space and in pieces that I've written recently as a way of relating to things like tending rather than sort of accomplishing or the completion, and like something that needs to be done. And I was thinking about it in particular with relationships, partly today, because I just launched a program called Relationship by Design. And it's actually, I'll put the link in the comments when this is complete, but or maybe I'll just do it now so people have it. Actually, no, it's going to take me away from all of you. Scratch that. But I'll put it in the comments when I'm complete here. And one piece is it just has really relationship in my space, in my field, like thinking about what are the fundamentals, of the last 20 years, really, of like teaching, facilitating, coaching in the realm of relationship, communication, intimacy. What do I see? Like, what are those cornerstones, that must be in place before you can build like the most beautiful, sturdy house. So that's part of it. But I was also laughing at myself a little bit in the shower this morning because I was thinking the danger of naming a program Relationship by Design is that it actually ties into this, I would call it a misconception, this kind of misconception or misunderstanding we have that like we could design it all. And I do think design, rather than like plan, like relationship by planning or something, the designing has more movement and creativity. But there's something still in that ties into, again, like a misunderstanding that I think many humans come to relationship with already, which is that we need to plan it out. We need to know how it's going to go. Sometimes we think we already know how it's going to go, and that's kind of a whole other piece. But that we're gonna, like, when we design it, that means we, again, like kind of like designing a house, that you would actually draw the whole thing out, and then it's like that, and then you're going to build it just like that. That's somehow how it's going to go. And so I wanted to bring in this idea of tending, because to me, tending requires to tend to something or to attend to. It requires, one thing that I love is when I thought of this word attend, like we think of like attending to something, like I need to attend to that. But also we use the word attend, like attend an event. And when I thought about it, so I didn't have time this morning to go look up like where these words come from, the etymology of them and the different meanings. And so I'm going to do that later, and I'll share in the comments anything that I find. And I'd also love to hear anything that you know about the etymology or the origins of the word tend and attend. But simply in English, attend both means to attend to something like, oh, I need to attend to the dishes, right? Like I need to do the dishes. But it also means like we attend events, we attend a party, we attend a gala, we attend, and to attend means that we show up. And I think of two things with that, and I'll come back to the tending piece, but to attend, so first of all, if I am showing up for something, right? If I'm attending an event, the same as I'm attending to my relationships. So I actually have to be there in order to attend. And that's one piece of a relationship that often gets lost, is sort of like, we think, oh, I need to show up in this way, or I have to do this thing, or I have to look this way, or be this kind of person, or perform these certain tasks and roles, right? Like in order to be a good mother to my children, I need to feed them a homemade meal every single night, or I need to make sure that we sit down all together and have dinner together, or I need to pack them homemade lunches every day, or I need to, and again, I'm certainly not saying that any of these things are bad things to do as a mother or as a parent, but the should, like these are specific tasks and sort of roles to fulfill in order to attend to my children, rather than the idea of like, oh no, I need to show up. And I, in terms of all of me. So often we only bring certain parts of ourselves, for instance, to our work, to our coworkers, to our colleagues, or to our professional self, right? We may be self-employed, but we only show one part of ourselves, or 50% of ourselves, or there's certain parts that definitely don't get revealed in sort of our business or our professional self, or and so then what does it mean to actually attend to, say, our business relationships or the relationships with our colleagues, and what would it mean to actually show up for them? Like for me, I actually show up, I attend that relationship. So that's one piece. Is really, and as with everything, a lot of what I'm going to bring up here are really inquiries, and for me, the process of inquiry is a kind of tending, and it's really the most important piece of an inquiry like this is simply to be honest, to describe what is so, like, oh, I'm so curious, what parts do I bring to my business relationships or my coworker relationships, and I'm so curious what parts I don't. Not as a judgment, blame, shame, criticism, or to defend them, but simply to actually notice what is so, and to describe, like, oh yeah, this part I don't, and maybe in acknowledging that, I realize, and I don't want to. And maybe I realized, like, oh, I never even considered whether I could share, show, reveal, include this part of me, that this part of me could attend my relationships at work, or my relationship with my family, right? My family of origin. Do I have certain roles and responsibilities, or certain parts of me that I think I either must show or must not show, must not bring to the table? And I think that's true in all of our relationships, even our, often even our deepest friendships, or our life partners, or our children, or, that all of these are relationships. All of these are relationships. And they all need tending and attending. And so I do want to drop in as I talk about this idea of attending, and that it means that I show up. I actually have to be there. I have to be there. All of me. I don't just send. I can't necessarily say I've attended an event if I've just sent like a note of that I won't be there, or like some part of me, or a voicemail, right? Like that if I actually haven't fully showed up. But I do want to put in a distinction that I do think to bring all of ourselves doesn't necessarily mean everything. We used to have this distinction that we played with in Authentic World and the authentic relating processes and workshops and events and programs that I led. And we would say there was a difference between hide nothing and share everything. Right? And one is just sort of like every thought that I have, every you have to share everything in order to hide nothing. And then there's just that sense of like, oh, if I'm hesitating to reveal this, or I'm actively hiding it in some way, or I have a conscious or unconscious belief that it cannot be here. So I do think that's an important distinction to bring in when we talk about attending and showing up for our relationships. So the other piece of attending, and this goes along with tending, is that for the most part, we don't say that we attend like a museum. I mean, maybe we do, but I don't think so. We don't say like I attended that museum. We might visit the museum, but things that are always there in a semi-static state. We don't tend to use that word attended. Attended is more like an event, a gala. I don't know, for some reason attended also is sort of like, they tend to be more special events. We can say I attended that party, but again, that's a special event. But my point again, again, I'm sort of, these just came to me in the shower this morning, these pieces of attend. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Is that they're alive, which means they're, I want to say ephemeral, but I don't mean like fleeting in necessarily that sense, or like poof, it's gone, but I mean that they happen in that particular way just then. And even if there's a yearly gala, like the Met Ball, right, or something, right? Everybody, the different people come. Some of them are regulars. There are people who have attended for, I don't know how long it's been going on, so I don't know if I can say decades here or if it's years, or but there are people who attend over and over and over yearly, but they wear different outfits. They show up differently. They probably talk to different people. They have a different experience. And then there are people who come once and never come again, or who didn't come for years and then come. And that particular happening in the way that it is really only ever happens once. And so it's alive in that way. And relationships are the same. Relationships are like that. So I had a friend who I have not been in contact with for a very, very long time, named Mark Michael Lewis. And he wrote a book called it's either Relation Dance or Relation Dancing. I'm not sure. I did not actually read the book, but I talked to him about it. And the premise behind it was he didn't like the term relationship, because a ship, I think the way he talked about it was, this could be argued. I could actually see, and this is how my mind works. I'm like, what, da, 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 da. I'm like, I have a whole, brain tree that opens from there. But that a ship like starts in one place and it's headed in one place. And it's sort of this, so even though it's not static, it does move, but it has this sort of static orientation. And he was saying that relationships really are more like this ever-changing fluid dance, between two or more people. Although I do believe we have one with ourselves as well. So it's all the parts inside us. But that there's, one person moves in a dance, and that it then has an impact. Even in dances that are somewhat set, that the way that one person does part of a move then impacts how the other person will do the next part of the move with that dance. And so there is this real fluid, alive nature to it. And so I do love that piece. So that goes with this piece of when we talk about attending, and we're attending an event that exists in that time and space, and in that way, never again, that our relationships are like that, moment to moment. That actually to attend to our relationships requires that we recognize the alive and ever-changing nature of a relationship. And that when we cease to hold or experience relationships in that way, is actually when they cease to be relationships. And there can be an ebb and a flow in that. I don't mean that, like if you forget for a moment, like, the relationship is over. What I mean is that there is actually not a relational dynamic in that moment. We've lost relationship. We've actually lost the relationship itself. Doesn't have its life. And we can discover it again in the next moment. We're like, oh, right, you're a living human being. You're a whole other universe, and you've changed, even if it was just a minute ago since I saw you, or you've had new experiences, or what is alive between us can shift and change. So obviously, there's a lot about each of us that does stay the same. I'm me. I was me when I was born. I was me at 5, 10, 15, 20, 32, and now 42. I don't say, oh, I was so-and-so then, and now I'm Kendra. Like, no, I was Kendra then, and I was Kendra all the way through all of those moments. However, I've also changed an enormous amount, both physically and emotionally and mentally. And I've learned things and I've forgotten them, and I've had experiences, and I've met people and I've lost people, and I've loved and I've had my heart broken, and I've been angry and I've been joyful, and life has touched me and changed me and shaped me. And that's true for every single being, not just human beings, but we'll stick with human beings for simplicity's sake, because it's already so vast and complex. So, but we tend to look at a person and we sort of reify them. We make them static in our gaze. And when we make them static, we lose the relationship. And so that capacity to actually, even though, this person, look, they were my husband 5 years ago, they're my husband today, they're going to be my husband tomorrow. I mean, we don't always know for sure, but there's a certain constancy to certain pieces. And at the same time, if we can hold simultaneously their wild and ever-changing self, and that actually even what it is to be husband and wife, or husband and husband, or partner and partner, or lovers, even what that is actually is dynamic. Inside whatever container we've set, inside whatever agreements we have with each other, there is something of a wild and ever-changing nature. And part of what it means to speak to this idea of relationship by design, and why I even created this course at all, is because I believe that to be in relationship by design, which another way to say that is consciously in relationship, chosen relationship, is to be willing to see and experience and hold this wild, ever-changing nature that is another human being, and that is a true relationship. And that is what it means to tend or to attend to. So if we only want to have a good relationship, and we have an idea what a good relationship is, and everything is towards a good relationship, or if I'm going to be a good girlfriend, or a good mother, or a good employee, or a good this, so that's one way of reifying, what is it to be good in these relationships, or for my relationship to be good. Or to get stuck in these notions of what it means to show up, the roles and responsibilities for these different relationships in our life. And relationship by design, I created it in particular because I really wanted to bring these teachings into a much wider domain of relationship, and not just intimate, romantic, sexual relationship, but to look at our relationships with our friends, and our relationships with our blood family, and our relationships with our partners and co-parents and lovers and children and colleagues and teachers and clients. We're in so many relationships in our life. I mean, that's really what it's all made up of. It's all made up of relationships. And so learning the threads that run through all of them in a way that we can be in dynamic, chosen relationship with the other. I mean, again, this broadens out into the non-human realm and the spiritual realm and all these, but let's just start with the other human beings in our lives. Let's just start there. That if we get too static about it and have these ideas about how we must show up, or how they must show up, or what it takes to be in these relationships, or what is required, or what is not allowed, that first of all, we really, I think we lose relationship because we lose the life. We lose the life that's there. And then also, kind of with losing the life that's there, part of that is that we lose the joy. And so right before I was going to start this, I was actually a couple minutes late. And part of that was because my daughter showed up. And I could have sort of met her either with like, not now, I'm not on right now, you're with your dad, right? That would be sort of not tending to her. But another way of tending is like, oh my God, if one of my children shows up, I should just drop everything else. And, I mean, how important is a live stream anyway? Like I could just do this anytime. And those are kind of the, polls. Anyway, those are polls around one way that I could parent, that I could be in that relationship. And then there's this more intangible, what I would say nuanced way, which is, okay, what needs to be tended to in this moment? And the other piece about tending is that it actually often doesn't take as much time and attention as we think. So we can become burdened in our relationships. This idea like, oh, I just, I take so much time, or I have to show up in all these ways, or I always have to cook dinner, or, he, she, they just need so much of my time and attention. What often is really called for is like real tending, real attention. So to be able to turn to my daughter and give her just directly, like, what exactly is the attention that she needs right now? What needs tending in this particular moment? She needed socks and a face mask, and for me to give her basically 1 minute of undivided attention in this particular moment. And then poof, she's off on a bike ride with her dad and already planning. I don't know, she has a whole thing she has planned. I had to check with him because I said, well, this is what our daughter's planning. Are you aware of these plans? She wants to camp with him in a tent. And I was like, are you part of these plans, or is she just planning them? Because that's how my daughter is. She just informs us how life is going to go. So tending, again, speaking to the way that I was talking to, we attend an event, and that event actually is happening in the moment. It's a moment. It's not momentary. I don't mean ephemeral like that, but it actually requires paying attention to what is happening in the moment. And to tend to relationships requires the same. It goes, oh, right now, in what way do I bring myself to this relationship? What does maybe this person need? What do I need in this relationship? So again, if we're going to tend to a relationship also, we must include ourselves in that. What is the dynamic need? So it acknowledges that there's fluidity, that there's movement, and that we pay attention to what is actually needed right then. So my dishes don't always need to be done, but sometimes they do. So if I was just like, I just do the dishes at 6:00, right? That's how I take care of my home. Sometimes they just don't need to be done. Sometimes my daughter doesn't need socks. Sometimes my partner doesn't need this. Sometimes my work or my colleagues they need or they don't need this. And so to approach with a gesture of tending actually requires that we notice what is happening right now, what is happening inside myself, what is actually happening with that other person or people, and what is actually happening in the dynamic between us. Like in a garden, so we tend in a garden. And there are times, I remember I went recently to our like farm and garden supply store that's local here, and I was buying fertilizer. But my partner was the one who said he wanted me to buy bat guano or something. And I couldn't remember what the or something else was. And so I went to the farm and garden supply, and they were out of bat guano. And I was like, darn it. So he had given me these two options, like what the replacement was, right? He didn't say if they don't have bat guano, buy this. He just said, buy this or this. I only remembered the bat. I don't know why. And so then I'm asking them like, well, what would you imagine would be a replacement? And they were like, we're not sure what your partner was thinking when they said that, which is great. They're hedging their bets. They're like, we can't speak for him. But this one guy was clearly really knowledgeable, and he was like, well, typically speaking, if someone's going for bat guano, this is what they're going for. And so this would be like the replacement. But he said to me specifically, because I was buying another fertilizer at the same time, he said, if you put this on, don't put this on also because you'll burn the plant. And I was like, good to know. So tending, if I either don't know or I'm not paying attention, it's just like more love is better, right? It's like the more salad dressing is better, sort of. And in tending to a relationship, that, for instance, like more time or more attention or more praise or more touch or more talking isn't always better, because it's not always what's actually needed for the tending. Does the tending, if we take a moment to look at our relationship and, what would tending this be? Is it actually like allowing for a little space for breath in a relational dynamic? Is it leaning in and offering a little touch? Is it inquiring and bringing curiosity or drawing something out? Is it adding some piece of beauty? What is the tending? So right in the garden, if I was tending and I put on some fertilizer, that if I'm tending to my garden, I'll notice like, oh, okay, that's been done. That's not what's needed right now. What's needed right now is that there's these new weeds and they need to be pulled. And then tomorrow I'm going to go and look and go, oh, it doesn't look like anyone's watered yet today. That's how I'm going to tend. But last night, if I looked and it was all watered, if I wasn't paying attention, I might be like, tend to the garden. That means water. And I could overwater a bunch of things, rather than if I'm tending, it requires that I pay attention. And when we pay attention, we will naturally begin to see the alive and fluid and semi-ever-changing nature of our relationships. So even inside of the same relational dynamic, so even if, again, we were to use, I'll use the example of my mother, for instance, right now. So she left me a message yesterday and she needed something. But then when I actually called her, I said, how are you doing? And she was in a totally different place. And what actually needed tending to in that moment was something else. And I could put a little pin in this thing that she had requested. And, it's Monique. She said, sending love. Oh, received. So I'm just going to pause here, because tending sometimes actually is the willingness to receive, right? To let that's part of tending to a relationship. We have to include ourselves. But tending could also be what Monique just did, which is, and we might think like, oh, I have to pop onto Kendra's like entire 30-minute, 45-minute live stream. Man, that woman talks so much. I just can't I can't attend to that relationship because, she just needs me to watch the whole thing. But I don't, it's so beautiful that she's able to just pop on and say hi. And I can feel like, oh, our relationship dynamic, that space between us was just fed. I'll come back to this piece of my mother in a minute because it's important, but it reminds me, there's a woman in my membership program called The Collective who shared a story recently about a friend that she has where their relationship consists of only sending emojis to each other. And sometimes that will be several texts in a short span of like an hour. But sometimes I think I might be getting this wrong, but the basis is basically the same, that she had sent this friend of hers a text. I want to say it was 3 years ago, maybe it was 1 year, but it was a really long time. And just yesterday, she received the response and it was perfect. It was like the perfect emoji response. And she knew exactly what to do and responded. And I thought, well, yes, because that's allowing the relationship to be what it is, rather than thinking like, well, this is so good, we should talk on the phone every week. This is actually the relationship between these two people that nourishes them. And tending to it looks very different than tending to a different relationship. So, and I just saw Lisa saying this is a wonderful analogy. So I'm so glad. I'm glad it works. I'm glad for you. So my mother, the reason I'm saying this is I wrote myself this note that said, who, what, how needs attending now, which is kind of cute. It rhymes. We can take that. It's like one of those school sing-song things that allows us to learn who, what, how needs attending now. And what I mean by who is twofold. One is, I can sit here in my office and I can just go like, who needs attending to? And, maybe a friend will pop up, or maybe one of my children, or maybe a client or a colleague, so there can be that way of who needs attending to. But also, I mean that in the sense of as any person arrives, like my mother, she sent me a message, or she left me a voicemail, which is why I called her. But when I got on the phone with her, I had, this is kind of a habit for me now. I think it's a good habit. But I sort of automatically check in with who is the mother that needs attending right now, without assuming that I know what she needs or I know who she is. I guess that's more important right now, like that I know who she is in this moment. She's reified as my mother. I've known her for 42 years. I know who she is, not to mention that only 10 minutes ago, she left me a voicemail. So clearly that's who she is. But I allowed in that moment to go, how are you? So then she's allowed to arise in that moment. Who? Oh, this is the being that needs tending and attending to right now. And then what? So what needs attending? What needs tending to? And the how is a little bit, so how am I going to do that? She might have a specific need that needs attending, and then how do I actually meet that? So who is the being? Letting them be alive. When I look at the garden, what is actually growing right now? Where in its growth cycle is it? The different beings. It's been fascinating. Certain things that I just thought were never going to go anywhere. I was like, they've been like the same size for weeks, and then suddenly they grew an inch. So paying attention, what's actually like sprouting, growing? Where is it at? What does it need, and how am I going to provide that? Or how am I going to tend? And this requires a lot of curiosity. Like, oh, I'm so curious. And then knowing that we might get it wrong. And that sometimes it is simply that bringing the curiosity and the attempt or the gesture that allows then a reflection of like, I didn't like that, or that didn't work. And we're, I got new information in your response that allows me now to bring a new gesture. So there's a certain willingness in tending. I think some might call it letting go of ego, not taking ourselves too seriously, not taking things personally. That can allow us to go like, so my gesture, what I thought was, who I thought was there, what I thought was needed, how I thought I should bring it, like, that didn't land. That wasn't correct, or it wasn't received in the way that I intended. And like, so now what? Just now what? Now what? And now what? And in that way, it's smaller. Yes, of course, sometimes there are chunks. Like sometimes the garden requires an entire afternoon. My partner and I, we put in a whole bunch of wood chipped paths. And that like took a chunk of time and a chunk of energy, and it took our physical labor. And then, then there are other days where all I do is sort of walk amongst the beds, for 30 minutes and maybe pull a weed here or there. And that's tending. And it's the same with our relationships. They don't always need like so much time, attention, energy, blah, 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 whatever it is. But they need like just our attention, like, what is needed? Oh, ding, like just drop that in. Just like my friend Monique just dropped a little comment in here. So again, I have one last little piece I want to wrap in here. And as I come to the close, I want to make sure that really, if you're here live or you're watching the replay, that any questions, curiosities, shares, ways this either makes sense in your life or ways that you're like, I don't know how that would relate to this, or please bring them in now. There's a bit of a lag time on Facebook Live, and so I would love to see what those are before I sign off. Although even if they come in the replay, I will come back around. I'll come back around. But I think of when we think tending and we say like who, what, how, who is here, what is needed, how can I bring it? That we can look at it from the perspective, like our perspective. Who do I think is here? What do I think is needed? How do I want to bring it? That's an absolutely valid perspective. And it's important, super important that we include ourselves in like the circle of relationship or in the relational dynamic. However, another perspective that's also important is really like, no, who are they? What do they really need? And how would it serve them for it to be brought? I used to have actually like a reminder that would pop up on my phone that all it said was love Lucas. And Lucas is the name of my partner. And that meant love him. Hopefully I'm loving him, all the time. And more often than the reminder. And it might seem odd to, quote unquote, need a reminder, but it would, in that moment when it would come, it would orient, and I would really put my attention on what would loving him right now really mean. And one of the things I love, because it would happen every single day, it was like at times when I was like super like gooey in love with him, and it would happen when I was caught up in work and wasn't thinking about him at all. I just wasn't having any thought about him. And it would happen when I was mad at him. And I was like, I know I love him, but I don't feel it. And it would happen when I was with him and when I wasn't with him, or if I was traveling, or, it could happen at any moment. And at times when he was, having a great time in life, and at times when he was having a challenging time in life, and all these. And so when the call to love him would come into my space, I would really put my attention on, to the best of my ability, him. And what would love be for him right now? And there were times when it was clear that actually, like me, just like going like exactly like you are. I love you, and you don't need to change. And like as maybe as hard of a time as you're having at work, as much space as you need right now, like almost removing myself was the greatest act of love that I could offer him. And then other times, I would realize like, oh, I could actually make him food and take it to him, and like bring myself into his space and love him in that way. And that would be love. But I had to, and then, infinite other possibilities, like texting or touching, or, just so many other possibilities. But I had to put my attention on him first to feel what was really called for. What would tend to the loving of him in that moment. And then I would say a third piece, and this example also falls into the third piece to some extent. It's a slightly different perspective, is what will bring more life. And I mean, the garden analogy really works just because I have this really beautiful big garden, and because I love gardening, and because I feel like very connected to the way that life moves through a garden. So you may have other analogies that work even better for you. But again, when I talked about like if I wasn't paying attention and the garden had already been watered and I watered it again, most days that actually wouldn't bring more life. Most days that also wouldn't kill the garden, but it might like, they're like, we were already wet. Like some days, there's a few days, like we've had some scorchers out here where watering in the morning and watering at night brings more life. Most days where I am only needs water once. And the overwatering, again, it's not going to kill most of our plants, but it's not going to bring more life. And sometimes actually what brings, like if I'm looking at the garden as a whole, right, as a relational dynamic and not just the individual plant. So is that sometimes actually pulling a plant up, it's like, all right, this plant is done. That brings more life to the garden. Or harvesting. Some of our broccoli was ready to be harvested, and then that brings more life to the garden rather than letting it go to seed. I did on purpose allowed like my whole cilantro patch to go to seed, and that was like, okay, that's more life for the garden. Again, my partner, so his favorite thing to do is what he calls, like, he gives the plants haircuts. And it's like a little anxiety provoking for me because he'll take, like, we had these tomato plants that were like super big and abundant and lush, and I've always just let my tomato plants just like go wild and they do fine, but he like gives them haircuts and he goes in and he snips, and then they're like and they really look like like dog, you know, those dogs that are like super floofy and then they get a shave and you're like, oh, like almost a little embarrassed for the dog, like it looks just a little bit nude and you're like, oh honey, you know. So our tomato plants look a little bit like that right after he gives them a haircut. And what happens right after he gives them a haircut is they just like shoot up and they put off fruit. And I was like, oh, he actually is tuned into what will bring more life. And sometimes what will bring more life is like pruning or this, you know, I think it's even true with our hair. I've been noticing my hair is like, it's funky, right? Because the hair places have been closed with shelter in place in California. I'm like, oh my God, I need a haircut for more life. And, you know, it can wait. Nothing's going to die if I don't get a haircut right now. So this question, when we go, you know, who is here, what is needed, and how does it need to be brought in order for there to be more life? And maybe it's more life in this relational dynamic between me and this exact person. And maybe there's something that just frees more life in general. I'm going to pause there. It's a lot. I know I'm a bit rambly. Max said, reminders as a call to consciousness. I love this. Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, for that for some people, the idea of call to consciousness, really like, yes, I know what that means. Call to awareness, it might land for some. Yes, I know what that means. Call to love. And they might all be kind of the same thing, but different for different people or for even the same person at different times, right? But so like whatever that is, but it brings us into, you know, another way that I would say a call to consciousness would be, it brings us into awareness of life in the present moment. Like, oh, how is life lifing right now? And what does life need to life even more fully? Absolutely. Lisa said, it feels there is a part of me that gets into a subtle role playing. I'm so aware of that and it keeps me holding back. Yes. I mean, first of all, I just want to say, like, my love, we all do that. And sometimes it's very obvious and big. And sometimes, like you said, it's subtle role playing. But I don't know. I literally don't know a single human being, like just checking, that does not do that sometimes. And I was working with a client the other day, and we were talking about something quite different than this, actually. But I was saying what I thought was most important for this person was what helps them remember. And when this client was asking me, they're like, "Why does the remembering seem more important than like staying on the path of it?" And I said, "Well, it was exactly what Lisa's speaking to here, which is, you know, I don't wish for you that you forget. I don't wish for you that you fall into role playing. I don't wish for you that you sort of fall out of attention with life. But realistically, we're all going to. I do it multiple times a day. Every single person I know does. And so I think when we're willing to put our attention on that gesture of remembering, number one, it helps us to take that forgetting with a little more levity. Like, oh, it's an opportunity to remember, rather than like, oh no. I forgot again. I'm on the wrong track. I started role playing. I lost connection with relationship. Just like, oh, but look, I have like tricks, tips, tools, practices, however you want to put it. I have a way of coming back into remembering. And often, I'll just use Lisa's share as a little access point here. I often find that it's actually noticing the thing that can be the access point to remembering. So the subtle role playing, I would say, rather than how, in that example, and you see how this can extrapolate for your own life, is that I would say, how do you know when you're role playing? And let those be the signals, not as you've done anything wrong, there's any shame, blame, or judgment, like, but like almost like a celebration, like, oh, that, like, oh, look, because when I notice that I'm role playing, and maybe there's specifics in specific relationships, like certain ways that I act with my intimate partner, certain ways I begin to act, at my job, or that those specifics can be little like reminders. But maybe there's also a way that I start to feel or act inside myself that it's like, oh, if I'm doing this, probably doing that subtle role playing thing. So now this can be a little like reminder. So to come back into contact with present life. And then we can just be so excited that we get to come back into present time with life again. Yeah, like an emotional entry point, or, again, we might start to hold our bodies certain ways. We might start to talk in certain way, like maybe our voice rises, or maybe we get irritated, or maybe, like all these things, with my kids. I mean, why I say the irritated is with my kids, I would say, is like one of the roles that I play is like the having to do all the things for them. And then I get irritated at them. And then I start really, and so when I catch myself like, why am I treating them like they're burdensome? I'm like, oh, because I'm imagining that they are putting these demands on me. But actually, like, I've just stuck myself back in that role. Okay, how do we come back into actual alive relationship right now that they probably do need something? It's not just like, they're fine. I mean, they really do need me. But they probably don't need me in these kind of static, demanded roles that I put myself in. They need some other kind of tending. Annika said, I think that would be a great reminder too for mothers. Oh, look, I see that was the bridge point, to love their children. Yes. Many think that talking about relationships means the relationship with partners, but our relationship to our children are so important. 100%. So Annika in particular, but many of you may have missed. I mean, part of the reason that I created this program, Relationship by Design, is that I so deeply wanted to speak to some of these fundamental practices and teachings and the way that they actually relate to all of our relationships. And, like, don't tell. The secret is they're all relationships. I mean, I have relationships with like the guy that works at the post office, and my, all my blood family, and individually with my blood family, right? Like my mother and my father, those are different relationships. What is my broader community, my relationship to my broader community, some of my friendships, absolutely 100% my relationship with my children, my relationships with my colleagues, my peers, my clients, if you actually do work in a more, like you have a job, all of those colleagues, all of those coworkers, the people, and there's all these different dynamics. There's so many relationships, and actually we can bring life to all of them. Even if the relationship we choose, even if it's like, oh, I only really want it like this is why it's called Relationship by Design, is we get to choose. Doesn't mean we have to have like a bare our soul relationship with every single one of our coworkers, but it can still be alive. It can be real in the sense that it's alive, and 100% with ourselves. And I do really appreciate, Annika, that you brought in the thing about children, because in all of our relationship, all these different ones, I'm like, as I say this, I'm going like, well, people do get static they're like, actually, this is the only kind of relationship I can have with my parents. This is the only kind of relationship I can have with my coworkers. This is the only kind of relationship I can have with my children. That many of us tend to sort of reify and make static many different relationships in our life. And so the reminder to bring this life to them, the awareness to see the being who's actually in front of us, and to check in with the dynamic that's actually there in the moment, and to go, what would tend to this? What would actually tending to this dynamic? Does it need water? Does it need sun? Does it need breath? Does it need touch? Does it need words of praise? Does it need space? Does it need silence? Does it need movement? Does it need, what does it need? So, I hope that's helpful and sparks aliveness, freedom, more love in some relationship or relationships in your life, in some place. I would love, I guess my invitation, what I would love, and my wish for you, I'll wrap those all into one, would be to like what's one piece of this, and what's one, it's kind of like, I would actually love 2 points, and what's like the one relationship would be really easy to do this in, like, oh, I see, it would be so easy to bring this here, like, and suddenly it just feels like more life. And then what's the relationship where you're like, either I don't wanna, I just feel crunchy, like I don't wanna try to do that here, or any relationship or relational area where the part of you is going like, that's nice, but like totally wouldn't work here. And again, that might be something that's more like with your coworkers, or it might be like with one of your parents or something. But to kind of pull, and with no obligation to actually do anything differently necessarily, but just that willingness inside yourself to explore, like in the relationship where it seems really easy, like, oh, that's how it would go. And then just to really be willing to be honest and acknowledge the place where you're like, there's some crunch or tension or constriction, and it's either like, I don't want to try to do that there, or this won't work there, or and the willingness to simply be honest about that is, I think, already provides more life. And then to be willing to be honest about, like, and if I were, this is how I might bring that in. So thank you. Thank you, as always, to those of you who are here live, for really offering your time and attention into this space. Anyone who watched the replay, certainly, especially all the way to the end. I did not intend to talk for almost an hour, but I deeply, deeply honor your time and attention. And I'm sending you so much love. Ciao.